Hi, everyone. Support for this show is brought to you by our friends at Bloomerang. Bloomerang offers donor management and online fundraising software that helps small to medium nonprofits like First Tee of Greater Akron, a nonprofit that empowers kids and teens through the game of golf. And after just 1 year with Bloomerang, they doubled their unique donors, improved donor stewardship, and raised more funds. Now, to listen to the full interview with First Tee of Greater Akron, visit bloomerang.com/nonprofit-nation, bloomerang.com/nonprofit-nation, or click the link in the show notes. Thanks, and let's get to the show. Hello, and welcome to Nonprofit Nation. I'm your host, Julia Campbell, and I'm going to sit down with nonprofit industry experts, fundraisers, marketers, and everyone in between to get real and discuss what it takes to build that movement that you've been dreaming of. I created the Nonprofit Nation podcast to share practical wisdom and strategies to help you confidently find your voice, definitively grow your audience, and effectively build your movement. If you're a nonprofit newbie or an experienced professional who's looking to get more visibility, reach more people, and create even more impact, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Nonprofit Nation. I am so thrilled that you're joining me today. I am your host, Julia Campbell. Today, we are going to talk about what to do when your fundraising results fall flat and why this is most likely a result of beliefs about fundraising rather than something tactical that you're doing. And today, I have a long-awaited guest. People have actually asked me, Stephen, when you're going to be on and recommended you several times. So finally, today, I have Stephen Screen on the podcast. Stephen is co-founder of the Better Fundraising Company and lead author of its blog. With over 25 years fundraising experience, he gets energized by helping organizations understand how they can raise more money. He's a second-generation fundraiser, a past winner of the Direct Mail Package of the Year, and data-driven. So welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Thank you, Julia. It's nice to be here. It's a privilege.
And we were talking a little bit earlier, and I said I was going to ask you about starting your nonprofit journey and how many of my guests say that it was accidental and they fell into it. And you said you have a little bit of a different story. So I'm excited to hear it.
I'm lucky to be a second-generation fundraiser. My dad was a professional fundraiser, so I knew growing up that that was a career. His experience was that starting in the late 60s, he was at one of the agencies that helped a whole bunch of organizations go national using mass media effectively for the first time for branding and awareness, and then direct response fundraising in the mail, in TV, in radio. So I grew up knowing that all of those things were possible, and there was a bunch of just really good thinking about fundraising in the water that I grew up in that was born out of, sending out millions of pieces of mail and knowing which type worked best and spending millions of dollars on TV shows and knowing what types of shows worked better than others, what time slots worked better than others. I was very fortunate to sort of be raised in this environment where it was really clear that there was a good, rigorous science behind what works best in fundraising, especially in the direct response context. Tons and tons and tons of testing.
I love that. So tell me about what you do now, and that you do a lot of direct response marketing and fundraising now as well.
Yeah. So Better Fundraising helps small to medium-sized nonprofits do better direct response fundraising and have better overall fundraising strategy in terms of majors and grants and fundraising comms. That's what we do. It's all born out of testing for what works best versus what is going to work okay, but not as well. And it's a joy to do. I used to work with the big, large national organizations and found that I get a lot more pleasure helping an organization sort of increase by 20% as opposed to being part of a team of 7 people helping an organization increase by 0.5%. There's nothing wrong with that. It's great when 0.5% means an additional $10 million. Awesome. But boy, it's fun to watch the transformation of an organization that goes from raising, say, 300,000 to $1 million. That's what excites me about this work.
Well, I love that. And I have been a huge fan of your newsletter, the Better Fundraising Company newsletter, which is incredibly inspiring. You send out your blog posts, and I almost feel about it. I'm going to give you a very high compliment. I feel about it like I feel about Seth Godin's email newsletter, where I always think of something differently. So it's not just a list of how-tos and 5 ways to tweak your copy, although there is some of that, but it's a lot of thinking differently and examining what's really holding you back rather than just like, here's like the shiny new tech tool. So what I really wanted to talk about today is a particular post that you wrote. I want to really break it down and talk about how small nonprofits can start to make movement in this area. But if the growth of fundraising has flattened. So you are known for writing this effective copy, this wonderful, effective, compelling fundraising copy for getting your clients these like dramatic transformational results. But sometimes it's not the copy or the tools. And in this post, you wrote, if the growth of your fundraising has flattened out, it's most likely a result of a belief that's holding you back. So what did you mean by that?
Well, first of all, this is fun to focus on because yes, 3 edits to make to your next letter are going to help some people raise some more money with their next letter. But ultimately, I think it's changing how people think about fundraising and helping them know what's possible in fundraising that results in the biggest jumps in performance. It's almost always changing a belief that moves an organization to the next level as opposed to changing a tactic. So all that said, if results are flat, you write definition of insanity, doing the same thing again and expecting different results. That happens all the time in nonprofits. We sort of don't tend to realize that we were perfectly designed to raise the amount of money we raised last year. And if we want to raise a different amount of money, we're going to have to make meaningful changes to something that we're doing. What are the things that can be changed? And specifically, what I was trying to address in that post was, what are the things that organizations sort of have beliefs around that they can't change that they actually can?
Okay. So what kinds of beliefs prevent us from fundraising effectively?
Yeah. Well, let's see. 3 or 4 core ones off the top of my head. We can't be asking our donors for support any more than we currently are.
They're tapped
that's
out.
one.
They're fatigued.
Yeah, the mythical donor fatigue. Number 2 is our voice is core to who we are, and we cannot change it.
Oh, I love that one.
Another one would be that we can't share any needs being faced by our beneficiaries or our organization. Another one, I could go deeper, but this is what occurs to me off the top of my head, is that complaints are bad. And we have to manage our work so that we don't get any complaints.
Oh, so we don't get that one email from our 15,000 person email list that says, I disagree with you, but the other 14,999 people agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Or 2 unsubscribes.
Yes.
Or even 15 unsubscribes. If we manage towards everybody being happy, we are managing towards having a smaller impact.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
So there's 4.
I think we should unpack these 4. I absolutely love these 4. Let's unpack donor fatigue. So why do organizations think this way, and how can we overcome it?
Organizations think this way for a whole stew of reasons. Number 1, nobody really likes fundraising. So it's already forcing us to be vulnerable and awkward. So anytime you get bad feedback, and that can be a lot of no's, it can be a lot of nothings, it can be complaints. Anytime you get bad feedback in a position where you're already vulnerable, you think, oh, well, I'm doing this too much. Another thing is that most smaller nonprofits are only in touch with a small segment of their audience, of their donors, but they've got a larger circle of folks who are outside the core who they're not talking with. And they assume that anybody who says anything in the core speaks for everybody on the outer group.
Oh my gosh, so true.
And it's just not true. Because in the core, for instance, if I send you 4 pieces of direct mail over the course of the year and you're core, you're going to open all 4. But if you're not core, you're maybe going to open 2. And that's still pretty good. So the core is like, oh my God, we're sending so much fundraising. But the folks outside the core are like, no, I almost never hear from those people. You got to be able to do that. Because our sector has expanded so rapidly in the past 30 years, there hasn't been a lot of great fundraising training. So most people, small organizations, have no idea that you can send out 16 appeal letters, 10 printed newsletters, and 50 fundraising emails a year and be doing great. They don't think that's even possible. Yet that's happening every day in the top couple percentage of organizations. And those donors are giving to small organizations too. So you put all that together and people are afraid and they're like, oh, donor fatigue, it must be happening. Also, can I say something that's slightly
offensive, provocative? Yes.
Well, this can be
controversial.
This can be off-putting, but saying that it's donor fatigue blames the donors. Whereas you could say, you know what, maybe our fundraising isn't resonating. You could say, gosh, we're not even getting their attention. So by calling it donor fatigue, the organization doesn't have to take any responsibility for its fundraising being ineffective.
Preach. Absolutely. And I teach marketing, same thing. Oh, no one's paying attention. Oh, it's because of all the digital clutter, or it's because they have attention spans of a goldfish, or it's because it's an election, or it's because of whatever. But how about we shine the spotlight on ourselves and say, maybe what we're doing is ineffective. That's so important.
Yep.
All right.
At least you got to look. At least you have to look at that as a possibility.
Mm-hmm. I love the second belief. I believe it was something around, we don't want to share needs. We don't want to talk about the real need and share these stories. How can we address this?
Well, I mean, that's another set of internal beliefs that lead you to that conclusion. And there are some reasons where there are certain needs and certain stories we shouldn't be sharing. But as a rule, I think organizations often sort of take it too far. You could look at their fundraising and not know that anybody is in pain or hurting today. You could not know that there are real problems in the world that need to be solved. And donors, as a rule, respond to problems. One of my core beliefs is that donors give to make change. And so if you say, we're doing good work, will you give to help us continue our good work? That has said to the donor that no change will happen when you give a gift. Because we're doing it now and we're going to continue it, no change. But if you say, donor, there is a big problem in the world today and good people like you are needed to solve it, will you give a gift so that one person will no longer have this problem? Then there has been real meaningful change. And more people are willing to say yes and give you money when you say that their gift will cause real meaningful change. So anyway, that's sort of down in the application of this, but the unwillingness to share needs holds many, many organizations back from raising more money.
Wow. And by the way, anyone listening, Stephen and his amazing blogging team, they talk a lot about how to reframe the ask in these kinds of ways, specifically on the blog. I know that I've read this, framing the problem and not just simply, we did great work this year, but what is going to happen next year? And why is your support still needed? And hey, this is still a problem. Like, yeah, we're doing good work, but we still need people like you to invest in this problem. So that's so important. I also love that other belief that you discussed, something about we don't want to change our voice. We want to stay true to our voice. Yeah. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. What I want people to realize is that all of our voices change when our contexts change. The best way I can think of to illustrate this is sort of like if you're writing a TV show, you write knowing that you have the visual on the TV to be helping you tell the story. Then you take that same writer, and that writer is writing for a radio program where there is no picture, there is only the theater of the mind. The writer writes differently, because she knows that the context that the message is being received in is different. So what we need to do in nonprofits is remember the different contexts that our messages come in. Our message and our voice can and should be different at an event where we have someone's undivided attention for an hour and 15 minutes versus a piece of direct mail where I've got someone's attention for maybe 5 seconds. You don't have time for all of the things that you like in your voice in the context of direct response fundraising. So rather than trying to figure out how to fit your voice into a context, you want to be trying to figure out what does our voice need to be like to succeed in this context? And that is a different question. It gets a different answer. And frankly, it ends up with more successful fundraising.
This is so powerful. So the fourth belief, which is something that I feel like I talk about every single day, we don't want to get any complaints. Now, I completely can relate to this because if I send out an email newsletter, I'm sure you get this too, Stephen, and I get one person coming back, although I think I've weeded all those people out by now, anyone that's going to be offended by anything that I say. But someone comes back to me and says something really nasty, like that really rarely happens, or just says, this isn't relevant to me, I'm unsubscribing. You think about it and it really affects you but you're not listening to all of the people that are saying great things or are just being quiet, or just kind of being silent and reading what you're saying. So say I'm a small shop fundraiser and my boss or my board is saying, well, we don't want to get those unsubscribes. We don't want to get any complaints. We don't want to offend anybody. We don't want to turn anybody off. What advice would you give to them?
It's hard for me to answer that question because I've been doing this so long and sort of people pay attention to me differently when I go into a board meeting as opposed to a person who's been doing fundraising for 2 years and doesn't have sort of the experience to back it up. Mm-hmm. But as a rule, I would say that, okay, organizations, if we are managing to get no complaints and no unsubscribes, we will be creating vanilla communications that
no one's paying attention.
That aren't particularly memorable or motivating. That is probably going to mean bad things for our fundraising, or at least places a cap on how much we can raise from the people who are willing to pay attention to us. Now, let's look at those really big organizations. One in our backyard here is an organization called World Vision. I think they're raising $1.8 billion a year. They have a whole department to handle complaints and donor issues. And they are thrilled to have that department because the part of the human condition is somebody is going to dislike what you say, no matter who you are, what you say, how nice it is. So as you get bigger, you are going to get complaints. You're going to get pushback. These things are going to happen. And so you need to take that as a good sign that you're getting bigger and affecting more people. Nobody gets big and never gets complaints. Lots of people never get complaints and stay small. The way I think about this is sort of the difference between a fee and a fine. A fine is something that you pay when you've done something wrong. You pay a fine after you get a speeding ticket because you've broken the law. But a fee is something that you pay in order to achieve an outcome. I will pay a fee to go into Disneyland. I will pay a fee to get a new computer. And most nonprofits experience complaints as fines. It is internally taken as something wrong. Whereas I want them to take it as a fee that you gladly pay because you are doing fundraising that's interesting and motivating and is out there making change as opposed to vanilla.
I love that. The fee versus the fine. It's just the cost of doing business if you're making change. Yeah. It's the cost of doing what we do. Absolutely.
And it's also really good to remember that a lot of people's complaints that come in, it's not about the fundraising. The fundraising revealed something in the donor that the donor doesn't like. I don't like that people are homeless today, but the fundraising did not cause that tension. The fundraising just revealed that tension. And if we are going to have a big impact as organizations in the world, we have to be pointing out tension that exists in the world and saying, great people are needed to solve this. And some people's response to that tension is dislike, complaints, leaving your mailing list. But a lot of people's response to that tension is to generously give gifts of time and attention to help your organization have a greater impact. But it's both and. You're going to have both. There's no way around it.
There's no way around it. Wow. I feel like I need to pick your brain for the small nonprofit that is listening. That's the majority of my listeners. Now, when you said you gave that sample calendar of communications in a previous answer, and I'm sure a lot of people listening were just thinking like blew their mind. What was it? 55 email communications, 10 email newsletters, and 15 mail appeals, 5 mail appeals? I don't remember.
52 fundraising emails, 16 printed appeal letters, and 10 printed newsletters.
Yes.
Ish.
How can we convince the small nonprofits listening to communicate more and ask more often?
Let's see. All I think we can do is encourage them to try and make it easy for them to do so. So the encourage to try is that, hey, you're perfectly designed to raise how much you've been raising. Try some new stuff. The easiest way to raise more money is to send another appeal, whether it's an email or a snail mail. That is the easiest, simplest way. We live in a fundraising friendly world, and your appeals don't have to be perfect. They don't have to take 6 weeks to, write and design. Your donors know that there are problems in the world and would love to help solve them. And oftentimes they just need to be reminded. That's thing number one, is to sort of lower the emotional stakes and say, just try it. Because any negative consequences that you fear from trying something that doesn't work are usually so tiny. And then try to make it easy. Like for a lot of organizations, I have them, for small organizations with super minimal resources, I have them take last year's year-end letter and send that out again. Don't change anything. Just send it out again. And then write another year-end letter for this year that's a little shorter and send that too. And so now with the effort of writing one more letter, you've sent 2 letters and you're going to raise about 1 1/3 as much. So you're all of a sudden, now you've got a year-end campaign with 2 letters, you're raising more money and you didn't have to do any more effort. Okay, that's a good deal. And then to the work less, raise more thing that I started, that is designed to make it really, really easy for small nonprofits to, in usually an hour or 2, to create a powerful piece of fundraising. That is the whole reason that product exists.
Work less, raise more, and lower the emotional stakes. I can't tell you how much I love that. And I've worked on several year-end campaigns, and the amount of edits and the amount of literally tweaking one word and one image and one subject line and one this, where there's no real magic formula unless you test it, unless you see what happens, unless you are actively sending out more communications, because how else will you know what people are going to respond to? If you're only sending one, I've had clients that come to me, they send one newsletter a quarter, one email newsletter a quarter. And I think if someone deletes that, they don't hear from you for half a year.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you're wondering why they've forgotten about you.
I know this is hard for small shop organizations, but one of my planning principles as I help organizations create annual plans is to never go dark. Just never go dark. At least once a month, be in front of your donors. And that can seem like a lot, but think of it instead as a generous choice on behalf of your beneficiaries to always be showing up in your donors' lives, as opposed to being the friend who shows up every 6 months and wants the same level of intimacy that you have when you're spending every weekend together. And the same thing is true in our fundraising communications. It's not exactly true, but the principle holds.
And that's a very important mindset shift too, for people that think they're bothering their donors. The way you're framing it is generous communication, showing up generously for someone that wants to be involved with you, that has raised their hand and said, I want to hear from you. And yeah, you think Target doesn't, email me all the time because I've raised my hand and said, I want to hear from you. You think that, there's other businesses that they don't take advantage of that relationship. But I think for nonprofits, we're just so worried about overplaying our hand that we don't play anything at all. And we end up going dark when we shouldn't go dark.
And that all goes back to fears around asking, fears around being vulnerable, and then sort of not doing the math on things like, hey, I know we emailed our donors last week, but actually our open rate is 25%. So 75% of our donors did not hear from us last week.
People think they post on social media and they send an email and all of their donors saw it. And then I have to break it to them that, it's 2% of people on social media saw it and maybe 25% of your donors actually opened it. And so that's a real reality.
That gets towards the other thing I want small shops to know. And again, this is again, advice tuned to help them be more comfortable with not having to feel like, OMG, I have to do so much more work. Mm-hmm. And that is the biggest lost lesson from marketing to fundraising is the power of repetition. When I used to buy radio ads all over the country, the goal was to have a person hear the same ad 3 times in a week. And the board never complained when they heard the second ad on Tuesday after hearing it once on Monday. But that happens for some reason all the time in nonprofits. Again, all because of vulnerability and fears around asking too much and all that stuff. But a lot of people don't ask until they've seen your message 3 or 4 times. So sending it once that's opened by a quarter of your email file, 75% of the people didn't get the message, and of those 25, a whole big group of them weren't convinced because you didn't talk to them often enough. So send the same message multiple times. Send the same appeal 2 months in a row. Jeff Brooks has a great story about accidentally sending the same appeal in April that the organization sent in March. The print shop grabbed the wrong file. And so they sent the exact same letter with no changes, had the wrong date on it, right? It had a March date, even though it was being mailed in April. And the letter did better the second time than the first. So to bring the conversation full circle, right, we have all these beliefs about how fundraising works, and what we can and can't say, what we can and can't do, how often we can ask. And if we can take those core beliefs and start to question them, I mean, I can go a little deeper than that if you want, but that's where the big growth is.
Yes, let's go deeper.
Okay, so I use I'm sure you know Brene Brown.
Yes.
Her books are not about fundraising, but they're totally about fundraising.
I've always thought that. Yep. I've always thought about vulnerability.
That's exactly right. She says vulnerability is the glue that keeps human relationships together. And so think about that from a point of view of a nonprofit that is never vulnerable, right? The nonprofit is things are going great. Thanks so much for your previous support. We helped so many people. Would you help us continue our good work? There is zero vulnerability there. Nobody needs any help. It's all going great. So there is no glue keeping the donor and the organization together. So when you inject some vulnerability, hey, some of our beneficiaries need help right now, actually. Hey, our organization is $30,000 short at the end of this month. Could you help? Works like crazy because there's vulnerability now the donor feels needed. Anyway, her whole thing around the stories that we tell ourselves. Have you ever talked about that on the podcast, or had anyone
I have not talked about it on the podcast, but I'm very excited to. So I love this. Go ahead.
Great. Well, so the way she illustrates this, which I think is brilliant, is she and her husband are at home on a Friday night, and her husband goes over to the fridge and opens up the fridge, looks around for a second, sort of sighs resignedly, closes the door, and sort of slumps next to the fridge. And she starts to get all fired up, right? Because right? It's Brene. There's going to be a little anger and defensiveness in her reaction to this, which was she's disappointed. She's not the kind of wife that keeps a full fridge.
Oh, yeah.
She hasn't done a good job of getting the milk and stuff and taking care of her husband this week. And so she shares this with her husband, and her husband's like, "What are you talking about? We decided I was going to the grocery store this week. I drove by it twice. That sigh that I had was me going, I didn't do it this week." So Brene talks about the story she was telling herself was this one thing. Wife. And that's when the real story was not it at all. And so in nonprofits, the stories that we tell ourselves really affect how we fundraise. And so first we have to become aware of the stories that we tell ourselves. One is, you know what, if we ask one more time, our donors are going to leave in a thundering herd because donor fatigue. Or if we have more than 2 unsubscribes per email, that means everybody is about to leave. As opposed to going, hold on, we have 10,000 people on the email list and we can afford to lose 2 every email for the next 37 years, right? They don't do the math. There's all this fear base. So anyway, figure out what your stories are. Find some alternative stories. Hey, maybe we could ask more. There are organizations that send 10 appeals a year. Why are we worried about 3? Let's explore that. And then third step is to try the news story out in a low stakes environment and try an email that is vulnerable. Try one conversation with a lapsed major donor. Where are the places where the stakes are low that we can try these news stories and see how they work?
Thank you so much, Stephen. This has been fantastic. I wish that I could have seen you speak at the storytelling conference. Are you speaking anywhere coming up?
I have nothing on the calendar right now, which is sort of both like a little sad, but you know what? That's great. I don't.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I feel like when I don't have things on the calendar, I get sad, but then I also get happy thinking, oh, I can be home and making a bigger impact doing writing or doing something else. But I hope that we get to meet in person. I would love to have more of these conversations. I just think they're so important. Where can people connect with you and learn more about working with you?
Betterfundraising.com. If you go there, and you can subscribe to our blog, which we publish almost every Tuesday and Thursday. And then we also have a free resource Friday where we try to give away some resource every Friday. I'm on Twitter at Stephen Screen. And then find me for small organizations. It's go to worklessraisemore.com. We have a membership program there where for $40 a month, you get access to tons and tons and tons of training. It's video-based training with first drafts already written for you to help you make really helpful, customized fundraising for your organization. It's priced so that anybody can do it for a month and take the trainings and make the stuff. And then I do a live Q&A every Friday, so people are able to come on and ask questions and get good feedback. Those are the main ways, Julia.
Okay. I will put all the links in the show notes for everyone. And just thank you so much for being here, for being vulnerable, for sharing all of your wonderful advice. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Stephen.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks for doing a great podcast that's inclusive and bringing a lot of voices. I love it.
Well, hey there. I wanted to say thank you for tuning into my show and for listening all the way to the end. If you really enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, and you'll get new episodes downloaded as soon as they come out. I would love if you left me a rating or a review, because this tells other people that my podcast is worth listening to. And then me and my guests can reach even more earbuds and create even more impact. So that's pretty much it. I'll be back soon with a brand new episode. But until then, you can find me on Instagram at Julia Campbell 77. Keep changing the world, you nonprofit unicorn.